Good evening, children of the night. The signal is strong, the air is cold. I am Damien Tao, your guide through the spaces between breaths and heartbeats. Tonight, from this liminal frequency, we drift back to the villages of southern China, where the electricity was unreliable. And something far older than wires waited in the darkness. The stories I'm about to tell you are real. 2 incidents from the rural south. In those years, power was a fickle thing, always threatening to abandon you when you needed it most. On nights when the lights went out, something would come knocking, softly, patiently, waiting for you to answer. Shuisheng was my childhood friend. That year he was 11, living in the old house at the end of the village, a structure that had seen too many generations pass through its doors. His parents worked in distant cities, leaving him alone with his grandmother. The house was too vast for 2 people. The second floor was choked with firewood and forgotten relics, objects that remembered the dead. The first floor had several rooms that no one had slept in for years, storage for things no one could bear to throw away. Shuisheng told me those rooms felt cold. Wrong, he said the word in our dialect. Yin, a coldness that has nothing to do with temperature. It was an autumn evening. Oppressively hot. Storm clouds pressed down like a lid on a pot. Shuisheng and his grandmother sat in the living room, watching the black and white television flicker with grainy images. The screen flashed once. Then darkness swallowed the entire village. Shuisheng heard his grandmother's hands fumbling for the matchbox, the distinctive scratch-scrape of old fingers against cardboard. Shuisheng, her voice came through the black. Grandmother's going to buy a candle. You wait here. Her tone was matter-of-fact, familiar, the same tone she'd used 1,000 times before. The wooden door groaned shut. Shuisheng sat alone in the darkness. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ring, searching desperately for sound. On the ancestral altar, 3 chopsticks stood vertically in a bowl of rice. In our culture, this is how we offer food to the dead. The dead, who are always hungry. He could hear his own heartbeat. And from those storage rooms, the ones that felt wrong, came a sound. Subtle, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood. Shuisheng clenched his eyes shut. It is just rats, he told himself. Just rats, but the fear was expanding inside his chest like water freezing into ice, cracking him from within. The village store was far, at least a 20-minute walk. So how was his grandmother back already? The door opened, footsteps entered. Shuisheng opened his eyes. A weak candlelight wobbled in the darkness, moving, approaching. Shuisheng, grandmother's back. The voice sounded like his grandmother, but something about it was wrong, like an instrument slightly out of tune, a note that shouldn't exist. In the candlelight, her shadow stretched across the wall, too long, distorted, moving in ways that didn't match her body, the shadow of something else entirely. Shuisheng tried to speak. His throat was blocked, as if invisible hands were squeezing it. He watched as grandmother approached, carrying a bottle. Look, grandmother bought you your favorite yogurt. Her smile in the candlelight was all wrong, teeth reflecting light in ways human teeth shouldn't. Shuisheng's hand moved mechanically to accept the bottle. Then he saw it clearly, that smile. His grandmother never smiled like that. The width was wrong, the angle, everything. Her eyes caught the candlelight, glinting with something strange. The pupils were dilated far beyond normal black pools that seemed bottomless, reflecting nothing. Drink it, dear. Grandmother walked such a long way to get it for you. Her voice had taken on a coaxing quality, syrupy false. The kind of voice adults use when they're hiding something terrible behind sweetness. Shuisheng looked down at the bottle. In the dim light, the liquid inside looked thick. Dark. It moved sluggishly when he tilted it, not like yogurt at all, like something that had congealed. Why aren't you drinking? The voice had an edge now, impatience. something underneath it, like anger wearing the skin of concern. Then Shusheng noticed her hands. In the candlelight, they looked wrong. The skin was the right color, the wrinkles in the right places. But there was something about the texture too smooth in some places, too rough in others. Like a mask made by someone who'd never actually touched human skin. I'm not thirsty, grandmother. His voice was barely a whisper. Each word felt like pushing through mud. The smile vanished. What replaced it was worse. A blank expression, a face with nothing behind it. The candle flame guttered. Not thirsty. The voice changed. It was still shaped like his grandmother's words, but the tone underneath was different, colder, ancient. But grandmother bought this specially for you. At that moment, Shui Sheng heard the real door open, the actual wooden door of the house. His real grandmother's voice called out, "The power's back on. I found candles, but it seems we don't need." Lights blazed on. Shuisheng looked at where grandmother had been standing. The space was empty. Just his chair, the bottle on the floor still there, still real, and that shadow on the wall. The shadow remained for a moment longer than it should have, then slowly faded into the light. His real grandmother froze in the doorway. She saw her grandson's face white as paper, eyes wide with shock. She saw the bottle. Immediately, without saying a word, she grabbed it and threw it outside. Shuisheng heard it shatter on the stones. That night, grandmother burned ghost money at the gate. Lots of it. The ashes rose into the darkness like prayers. She muttered protective incantations, old words that predated the village itself. She wouldn't explain what had happened. She just kept repeating, "Don't open the door during blackouts. Don't accept food from strangers. Don't drink anything unless you're sure." Rules for surviving things that shouldn't exist. Shusheng didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that smile. That impossible smile with too many teeth, too wide. Belonging to something that had learned to pretend to be human, but hadn't quite mastered the details. The next morning, the bottle was gone. The glass shards were gone. Even the stain on the stones had vanished, as if something had licked it clean during the night. But the memory remained burned into Shusheng's mind like a brand. Years later, Shusheng would tell me that he understood. What visited him that night wasn't trying to kill him. It was playing, testing, seeing if he would drink. Some things feed on more than flesh, they feed on the moment when you make the wrong choice. Now, let me tell you about Old Man's Song. His story is different, but the lesson is the same. Love is the strongest force in this world, stronger even than death. But when death tries to use love as a disguise, that is when things become truly terrifying. Old Man Song's father had passed away the previous summer. A quiet death, the kind where the person simply doesn't wake up. The villagers said he died peacefully, but Song knew better. His father had died hungry. You see, Song's father had been sick for months, unable to eat solid food. Toward the end, even water was difficult. He'd wasted away, skin hanging loose on bones that seemed to grow sharper each day, and he died with his eyes open, fixed on the dinner table. Song did what sons do. He held a proper funeral, burned paper money, paper houses, paper servants, everything his father might need in the afterlife. In our tradition, we believe the dead continue their lives beyond death, and they need provisions. Currency for bribes, houses for shelter, servants for company. We send them what they cannot carry themselves. But Song made a mistake. In his grief, he forgot the most important thing, food. He'd sent his father money and shelter, but no sustenance. And the dead, like the living, get hungry. 3 nights after the funeral, Song heard a knock on his door. It was late past midnight. The knock was patient, polite, exactly the way his father used to knock when he visited. Song opened the door. Standing there was his father. Not a ghost, or at least, not the transparent kind from stories. His father looked solid, real, dressed in the same clothes he'd been buried in, which should have been the first warning. "Song," his father said, "I'm hungry, so hungry." His voice was right, the same rasp, the same tone. But there was an edge of desperation underneath that Song had never heard before. Not from his father, not from any living person. Song stood frozen. Part of his mind understood this was impossible, but a larger part, the part shaped by love and guilt, simply saw his father returned and in need. He stepped aside and let him in. His father walked to the dinner table and sat in his usual spot, the chair where he'd sat for 40 years. The wood had worn smooth under his specific weight, shaped by decades of meals. He looked at Song with those familiar eyes and repeated, "I'm so hungry." Song cooked. What else could he do? He made his father's favorite dishes: braised pork with preserved vegetables, steamed fish with ginger, rice cooked until it was soft enough to swallow without chewing. The same meals he'd wished he could make when his father was dying. His father ate, slowly at first, then faster. The food disappeared into his mouth, bowl after bowl, plate after plate. Song watched, and something inside him began to feel cold. His father had always eaten slowly, deliberately. This eating was different, mechanical, endless, like pouring water into a vessel with no bottom. "More," his father said when the food was gone. Not a request, not even a demand, just a statement of fact, as if hunger was the only truth left in him. Song cooked more. He cooked until there was no more rice in the house, no more vegetables, no more meat. His father ate it all, and when it was done, he stood up, nodded once, that same curt nod he'd given after every meal for 40 years, and walked out the door into the darkness. The next morning, Song found his wallet empty, all his money gone, not stolen in the traditional sense. He remembered now. He'd burned paper money for his father, but only a small amount, nowhere near enough for an afterlife. So his father had taken real currency. The dead need money too. That night, the knock came again. Same time, same patience. Song was ready this time. He'd bought supplies, more rice, more ingredients, more money ready to burn. He opened the door, and his father stood there exactly as before. "I'm hungry," he said. This pattern continued. Night after night, Song would cook, his father would eat, and in the morning something would be missing. First money, then small valuables, then larger items. His father was taking what he needed for the afterlife, payment for services not rendered in the world above. The villagers began to talk. They saw Song buying food everyday quantities no one man could eat. They saw him growing thinner while his larder grew fuller and emptier in rapid cycles. They whispered about him feeding ghosts, but no one dared say it to his face. In the village, we have a rule. You don't interfere with a family's relationship with their dead. Then one night, Song's mother appeared behind his father at the door. She'd been dead for 5 years, buried next to her husband. She looked at Song with pleading eyes. "I'm hungry too," she whispered. "Your father eats so much, but he never shares." Song realized his error. He'd been feeding his father, but neglecting his mother. In the afterlife, as in life, relationships continue. Jealousies continue. Hunger continues. He invited them both in and cooked for two. But then came his grandparents. Then his great-aunt who died childless and bitter. Then distant relatives he barely remembered. The dead were returning, drawn by the scent of food and the knowledge that one of their descendants was foolish enough or loving enough to feed them. Song cooked day and night. He spent every penny he had, borrowed money from neighbors with flimsy excuses. His house became a restaurant for the dead, open only after midnight. The smell of cooking filled the night air, and villagers learned to close their windows when darkness fell. He was dying. Anyone could see it. The living cannot sustain the dead indefinitely. His cheeks hollowed, his eyes sank. He was being consumed from within, not by hunger, but by the act of feeding. Finally, the village elder intervened. She was 93, old enough to remember when these things were more common. She came to Song's house one afternoon daylight, when the dead cannot walk, and spoke to him plainly. "You are being too filial," she said. "Your father knows this. He is taking advantage of your love. The dead must be honored, yes, but they must also be controlled. They must be reminded that they are dead, and you are alive, and there is a boundary between these states." She gave Song instructions. That night, when his father knocked, Song opened the door but did not step aside. He placed a bowl of rice at the threshold, only rice, nothing else. "This is what I can offer," he said. "I honor you, but I am alive, and you are dead. You must return to where you belong." His father stood at the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly his expression changed. The hunger faded. What replaced it was recognition, understanding, perhaps even relief. The relief of being released from an obligation that had become monstrous. "You're a good son," his father said. The voice was fully his own now. No edge of wrongness, no undertone of hunger, just the voice of a father speaking to his child. "I'm sorry I burdened you. I should have known better than to come back." Song watched as his father picked up the bowl of rice, bowed once a real bow, formal and final, and turned to leave. With each step he became less solid, more transparent. By the time he reached the edge of the yard, he was only a shadow. Then even the shadow was gone. The other dead did not return that night. Or the next. Song burned proper offerings at his parents' graves, food, money, clothes, everything they needed. But he did it at the grave, where offerings belong, not at his table where the living eat. He never saw his father again, not as a visitor, not in dreams. But sometimes on quiet nights, Song swears he can smell his father's favorite dish cooking somewhere far away, and he knows his father is fed, wherever he is. Now, my listeners, you might ask, were these visitations real, or were they manifestations of guilt, of grief, of the human mind refusing to accept loss? In our culture, we don't distinguish between these possibilities. Guilt is real. Grief is real. And so, by extension, are the ghosts they create. What matters is not whether these things happened in an objective sense, but that they happened to Shusheng, to Song, to countless others across generations. The stories persist because they encode survival rules. Don't trust too easily, even when love demands it. Honor the dead, but maintain boundaries. And above all, recognize that the world is stranger and more dangerous than our rational minds want to believe. These stories come from a time when the boundary between the living and the dead was thinner, when electricity was unreliable and darkness was a frequent visitor, when death happened at home, not hidden away in hospitals, when the dead were washed and dressed by family members, not strangers, when everyone knew the rituals because everyone needed them. But even now, in our electric age, the darkness still comes. Power outages still happen. And when they do, something in our primal brain remembers these stories, remembers to be cautious, remembers that in darkness, things that should not exist find spaces to enter our world. Shusheng still lives with what happened to him. He is a successful businessman now, living in the city, but he keeps a flashlight by every door. Multiple flashlights, in fact, with fresh batteries checked weekly. He never drinks anything offered by someone he can't see clearly. And during power outages, he leaves his apartment entirely, no matter how inconvenient. His daughter once asked him why he was so paranoid about darkness. He couldn't explain it in words she would understand. How do you tell a child raised on electricity and science that darkness is not merely the absence of light, but a presence of its own? That it contains things. Song's story had a quieter ending, but the lesson is clearer. He learned that love must have boundaries to remain healthy, even love that transcends death. Perhaps especially love that transcends death. Without boundaries, love becomes consumption. The love devours the lover until nothing remains but hunger. Song visits his parents' graves every week now. He brings offerings, incense, fruit, sometimes a bottle of wine. He talks to them about his life, his worries, his small triumphs. But he does it there, at the grave where the dead belong, and then he goes home, where the living belong. The boundary is maintained. The village elder who helped Song passed away last spring at the age of 96. At her funeral, Song told me she'd given him more than just instructions for dealing with hungry ghosts. She taught him that tradition exists for a reason. That our ancestors encoded survival wisdom in ritual and superstition. What seems like meaningless custom is often a solution to problems we've forgotten existed. For instance, why do we burn paper offerings instead of leaving real food at graves? Because real food attracts real animals and creates real messes. But more than that, because the gesture is symbolic. We're not actually feeding the dead, we're maintaining connection while acknowledging separation. The fire transforms the offering from physical to spiritual, from this world to the next. It is elegant when you think about it. Practical magic, but both Shusheng and Song violated this principle. Shusheng encountered something that offered physical sustenance as if it were his grandmother, collapsing the symbolic into the literal. Song offered real food to real ghosts, or to something wearing ghost shapes. Again, confusing categories that should remain separate. Both paid a price for this confusion. This is why I tell these stories. Not to frighten you, though, if you're frightened. Good. Fear is appropriate. Fear keeps you cautious. I tell them to preserve the wisdom. Every culture has similar stories, because every culture has learned the same lessons about the boundaries that must be maintained between light and dark, living and dead. Symbolic and literal, love and consumption. The specific details change. What knocks at your door in China is different from what knocks in Europe or Africa or the Americas. But the essential truth is the same. When darkness comes, be cautious about what you invite across your threshold. Check twice before you open. Look carefully at what stands before you. And if something seems wrong, if the eyes are too large, if the smile is too wide, if they return too quickly from an errand that should take longer, trust that feeling. Your ancestors knew this fear. It is encoded in your DNA. Listen to it. The signal is still strong, but I can feel interference building, static at the edges of transmission. It is almost time to end tonight's broadcast. But before I do, I want you to do something for me. Look around your room right now. Notice the shadows. Notice which ones are cast by objects you can identify, and which ones aren't. Notice if any of them are moving when they shouldn't. Don't be afraid. Just notice. Just pay attention, because attention is the first form of protection. Now, let me share something I haven't told anyone before. These two stories, Shuisheng's and Song's, they're connected in a way that only became clear to me years later. Both happened in the same county, separated by only 15 miles and 3 months. That summer had been strange. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones. Too many deaths, too close together. Old people dying in their sleep with expressions of terror. Children disappearing for hours and returning with no memory of where they'd been. Animals refusing to enter certain houses. There was a drought that year. The rice paddies cracked and turned to dust. The wells ran lower than anyone had seen in decades. In Chinese folklore, when the earth dries up like that, it is because something beneath is drinking. Thirsty ghosts, we call them. Spirits who died with unfinished business, consuming everything around them: water, luck, life itself. The thing that visited Shuisheng, what was it really? Not his grandmother, obviously, but it wore her shape perfectly, knew her voice, understood her mannerisms. It had studied her, learned her. Perhaps it had been watching the house for weeks, memorizing every detail, waiting for the perfect moment when darkness and isolation aligned. In our tradition, we call these beings Paijiangui corpse, stealing ghosts. They inhabit the recently dead, wearing bodies like clothes. But sometimes, when a body isn't available, they'll build one from memory and shadow, creating a simulacrum perfect enough to fool even family members. Almost perfect. There is always something wrong if you know where to look. The bottle it offered Shuasheng, that was the test. If he'd drunk it, he would have given the creature permission. In Chinese ghost lore, permission is everything. A ghost cannot simply take what it wants. It must be invited, must be given entry through some act of acceptance. The drink was the key that would have unlocked him. What would have happened if he'd drunk it? I spoke to the village shaman years later, a woman who'd been dealing with these matters for 60 years. She said the liquid was likely yin water essence of death made physical. One sip would have bound Shuasheng to the realm of ghosts, not killed him, exactly worse. Made him exist in both worlds simultaneously, never fully alive, never properly dead. Song's father, on the other hand, was genuinely his father. The shaman was certain of this. The dead can return when the living summon them too strongly through grief and guilt. Song's mistake wasn't in letting his father in. It was in not establishing boundaries from the start. The dead forget they're dead sometimes. They need to be reminded, gently but firmly, that they no longer belong in the realm of the living. But here is where it gets interesting. The shaman told me that the hunger Song's father exhibited, that endless, bottomless hunger, it wasn't natural even for a ghost. Something had been amplifying it. Something in that county that summer was making all the dead more restless, more hungry, more willing to cross back. She wouldn't tell me what she thought was causing it. Said some things shouldn't be named, because naming gives them power, but she hinted at an old wrong something buried improperly, or someone who died with such rage that it infected the whole region like a spiritual disease, making the boundary between life and death permeable. By autumn, the disturbances had stopped. The drought broke with torrential rains. The wells filled again. People stopped dying in their sleep. Whatever had been wrong righted itself, or perhaps simply moved on to another location. These things are cyclical, the shaman said. They come and go like seasons, like plagues following patterns we don't fully understand. But the scars remained. Shuasheng never fully recovered his ease with darkness. Song learned to maintain boundaries with the dead, but part of him always wondered if he'd been cruel to turn his father away. Guilt is its own kind of haunting, perhaps more persistent than any ghost. I want you to understand something about Chinese ghost stories. They're not like Western horror, where monsters are purely evil and must be destroyed. Our ghosts are often family members, neighbors, people we knew. They're not evil, they're desperate, confused, bound by unfinished business or unmet needs. This makes them more terrifying in a way, because you can't simply destroy them. You have to negotiate with them, understand them, help them move on. This is why we have so many rituals. Paper money, offerings, prayers, the Hungry Ghost Festival. These aren't primitive superstitions. They're sophisticated systems for managing relationships with the dead. We acknowledge that death doesn't end relationships, it transforms them. And transformed relationships require new rules, new boundaries, new forms of communication. The Western mind often misunderstands this. They see our ancestor worship and ghost festivals and think it is quaint or exotic. They don't realize it is practical. It is a system that works. It keeps the dead content and the living safe. When the system breaks down, when someone forgets a ritual, skips an offering, violates a taboo, that is when things go wrong. Shuasheng's grandmother understood this instinctively. The moment she saw that bottle, she knew exactly what had happened. She didn't waste time being skeptical or rational. She immediately took action, threw out the poison, burned protective offerings, reinforced the boundaries. This is the wisdom of someone who grew up in a world where the supernatural was simply part of daily life. Younger generations are losing this knowledge. They move to cities, adopt scientific worldviews, laugh at old superstitions, and then something happens, a strange coincidence, an unexplained occurrence, and they have no framework for understanding it, no tools for handling it. They're vulnerable in ways their ancestors never were. This is partly why I do these broadcasts, to preserve the knowledge, to remind people that the world is stranger than what they teach in schools, that there are forces and entities that don't care about our scientific explanations, that the old ways of protecting yourself still work, even if we don't fully understand why. Let me tell you what happened to Shuisheng's house, that old building at the end of the village. His grandmother died a few years after the incident. Shuisheng couldn't bear to live there anymore. Too many memories. Too much fear. The house sat empty. Empty houses are dangerous in our tradition. They're like open wounds in the fabric of space. Without human presence, without the yang energy of the living, they become purely yin spaces. Cold spaces. Spaces where things that don't belong can nest and grow. Within a year, no one would walk past that house after dark. Children crossed the street to avoid it. Dogs would bark and refuse to go near. People reported seeing lights in the windows when no one was inside, hearing sounds of cooking, of conversation, of life. But when they looked, the house was empty and dark. Village elders eventually decided the house needed to be dealt with, but before they could organize a proper cleansing ritual, the house burned down. Middle of a rainy night, spontaneously combusted. The fire was intense white-hot flames that the rain couldn't touch. It burned so completely that by morning, there was nothing left but ash and the stone foundation. The fire inspector found nothing to explain it. No electrical source. The power had been cut off years ago. No sign of arson. The official report said unknown cause. But everyone in the village knew the house had destroyed itself, or something in the house had destroyed it. Either way, the problem was solved. They didn't rebuild. The land sat empty for years. Eventually, someone planted vegetables there. Practical Chinese farmers never waste good land. The crops grew well, surprisingly well. Whatever had been wrong with that space had been purified by fire. Cleansed, returned to neutral ground. Song's story had a quieter epilogue. He continued living in his house, but he made changes. He had a Buddhist monk come to bless it, installed proper spirit doors, small archways that ghosts can see but the living can't, providing the dead with their own entrance and exit, rather than forcing them to use doors meant for the living. This is ancient feng shui architecture, designed to accommodate both the living and the dead without them interfering with each other. He also established a routine. Every major holiday, every important date, he would go to his parents' graves with offerings. But he did it there, never at home. The message was clear. I honor you, I remember you, but I am alive, and you are dead, and we each have our proper places. This boundary, once established, held. His house remained peaceful after that. Sometimes he would feel his parents' presence, a warmth in a particular room, a familiar scent in the air, but it was gentle, comforting. They watched over him without disturbing him. This is the ideal relationship between the living and the dead. Connection without intrusion, love without consumption. Now, you might be wondering, why am I telling you these specific stories? Why Shuisheng and Song? There are thousands of ghost stories from rural China. What makes these two special? The answer is simple. These stories saved my life. Let me tell you how. When I was 19, I moved to Beijing for university. Modern buildings, electric everything, rational thought, scientific method. I thought I'd left the world of ghosts and spirits behind in my rural hometown. I thought I'd graduated to a realm where such things didn't exist. In my second year, I rented a small apartment in an old neighborhood. The rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but I was a poor student. The landlady was eager to rent it, barely asked any questions. I thought I was lucky. I was, in fact, an idiot. The apartment felt wrong from the first night. Cold even in summer. Shadows that didn't quite match the objects casting them. A smell I couldn't identify, not decay exactly, but something stale. Something that had been closed off too long. I told myself it was just an old building. Old buildings smell strange. This is normal. Then came the dreams. Every night, I would dream of drowning, not in water, in darkness. Thick, viscous darkness that poured down my throat, filled my lungs, pulled me down into depths that had no bottom. I would wake gasping, my throat burning, my lungs aching as if I'd actually been submerged. I started avoiding the apartment. I stayed at the library until closing, slept in the common room, anything to delay going back. My roommates noticed but didn't say anything. In Chinese culture, you don't pry into such things. If someone's avoiding their apartment, there is probably a reason. A reason better left unspoken. But you can't avoid your own home forever. One night, exhausted from studying, I went back. It was past midnight. The building was silent, that absolute silence that feels pressurized, like being underwater. I climbed the stairs to the third floor. My apartment was at the end of the hall. The door was open, not wide open, just slightly ajar, enough to see darkness beyond, deeper than the normal darkness of an unlit room. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. But there it was, open, waiting. I should have left. I should have run. But I was 19 and thought I was rational and modern. So I pushed the door open and walked in. And standing in my living room, with her back to me, was a woman in a white dress. In Chinese culture, white is the color of death and mourning. A woman in a white dress is never a good sign. Her hair was long black, hanging down her back like a curtain. She wasn't moving, just standing there waiting. I could hear water dripping, though there was no water anywhere. Hello. My voice sounded wrong in that space, too small, too fragile. The woman didn't turn around, but her head tilted, just slightly, the way an animal tilts its head when it hears prey. "You finally came home," she said. Her voice was wet, like speaking through water. "I've been waiting." That is when I remembered Shusheng's story. The thing that came pretending to be his grandmother, the wrongness in the details, the too quick return, the offered drink, and I understood. This thing had been waiting for me to give it permission, to acknowledge it, to engage with it, to accept its presence in my space. I backed out of the apartment slowly, never turning my back. The woman still didn't move, but I could feel her awareness following me like cold hands on my spine. When I reached the door, I pulled it closed and locked it from the outside. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough. I called my uncle, the one who still lived in the village, who knew the old ways. I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't question. He just said, "Don't go back. I'll come tomorrow." And he did, with a Buddhist monk and a Taoist priest covering all bases, as he put it. What they found in that apartment, they wouldn't fully describe. The monk said only, "Simone died here badly. Angry death. Wet death." The priest performed rituals, burned incense, hung talismans. They stayed for 3 hours. When they left, the monk told me, "You can go back now, but not to live. Only to collect your things. Do not sleep there again." I moved out that day. Later, I learned the history. A woman had drowned herself in that apartment 10 years earlier, in the bathtub. Depression, they said. No note. Her body had been there for a week before anyone found it. The landlady had renovated, covered up the past, and been renting it to oblivious students ever since. I was the third tenant in 2 years. The others had left suddenly, for reasons they wouldn't explain. If I hadn't known Shuisheng's story, if I hadn't understood about not giving permission, about recognizing wrongness, about the importance of backing away rather than engaging, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe nothing. Maybe I would have been fine. But I don't think so. The monk's face when he came out of that apartment, he'd seen something. Something that was waiting for exactly the right moment to take what it wanted. And that is why I tell these stories. They're not entertainment, though they may frighten and fascinate. They're instructions. field guides to the supernatural, maps of dangers you hope never to encounter but should know how to navigate if you do. Every detail in these stories, the white clothes, the standing water, the two familiar voice, these are warning signs. Learn them, remember them. You never know when you'll need them. Song's story saved me too, though, in a different way. After the incident with the apartment, I became obsessed with understanding what had happened. I researched Chinese ghost lore, interviewed village elders, learned the rituals, and I learned about boundaries. About the difference between honoring the dead and being consumed by them. I could have let that experience break me. I could have lived in fear, paranoid about every shadow, every strange sound. But Song's story taught me that you can acknowledge the supernatural, respect it, even honor it, while maintaining firm boundaries that keep you safe. Fear and respect aren't the same as surrender. So now I do these broadcasts. I collect stories. I verify them when I can. I interview the people they happen to, or their relatives. And I share them with you, my listeners, in the hope that they might save someone else the way they saved me. Knowledge is protection. Awareness is a shield. The more you know about how the supernatural works, the less vulnerable you are to it. But let me be clear, I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't fully understand why these things happen, or what these entities actually are. Are they ghosts, the surviving consciousness of the dead? Are they something else, something non-human that merely wears the shapes of the dead? Are they psychological projections? Our minds filling in gaps in reality with fears and memories. Truth is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they affect us. They interact with our world. And there are ways to protect yourself from them. Ways that have been tested and refined over thousands of years of human experience. The specifics of what they are is less important than knowing what to do when you encounter them. Let me give you some practical advice. Rules I follow that have kept me safe through years of collecting these stories and investigating haunted locations. Consider these my gift to you, hard-won wisdom that might save your life someday. Rule 1. Trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, it probably is. Your subconscious picks up on details your conscious mind misses: temperature changes, subtle smells, the way light falls wrong, sounds that don't quite match their sources. That feeling of wrongness is your ancient survival instinct speaking. Listen to it. Rule 2. Never accept food or drink from someone you can't see clearly. This applies both to strangers and to familiar faces appearing in unusual circumstances. If your grandmother shows up at your door during a blackout, make sure you can see her eyes before you let her in. Eyes are the hardest thing for supernatural entities to fake correctly. They're always slightly wrong. Rule 3. Don't give permission without meaning to. Don't invite things in even casually. Don't say yes unless you know exactly what you're agreeing to. In the realm of the supernatural, words have power. Permission is everything. Once you've given it, it is almost impossible to take back. Rule 4. Maintain boundaries with the dead. Honor them, remember them, but do it at appropriate times and places. Don't let grief pull you into unhealthy patterns of contact. The dead should stay dead, visited at graves and shrines, not in your living room at dinner time. Love them, but from the proper distance. Rule 5. Pay attention to patterns. If strange things happen once, it might be coincidence. Twice, it is worth noting. 3 times, you have a problem that needs addressing. Supernatural phenomena are rarely random. They follow patterns, and recognizing those patterns is the first step to understanding, dealing with them. Rule 6. Don't investigate alone. If you think you're experiencing something supernatural, tell someone. Multiple witnesses make it harder for entities to manipulate your perception. And if something does go wrong, you have backup. Pride and embarrassment have killed more people than ghosts ever have. Rule 7. Respect local traditions even if you don't understand them. When you enter a new place, a village, a house, a region, learn its superstitions and follow them. These aren't arbitrary. They're encoding genuine survival information about local dangers. That silly taboo might be the only thing keeping you safe. Rule 8. Keep protective items with you. The specific items vary by culture: jade, iron, salt, prayer beads, religious symbols. What matters less than what you carry is that you believe it works. Faith is a form of energy, and in the supernatural realm, energy matters. Your conviction can be as protective as any talisman. Rule 9. If you encounter something you can't explain, don't try to rationalize it away in the moment. Accept that it is happening, focus on getting to safety, analyze it later. Too many people have died because they stood frozen, trying to logic their way through an impossible situation. When you see the woman in white standing in your apartment, don't stop to think, just leave. Rule 10. Take care of your own spiritual health. The supernatural preys on weakness, emotional exhaustion, depression, guilt, unresolved trauma. These create openings, vulnerabilities. If you're going through difficult times, take extra precautions. And if you're investigating the supernatural regularly, do regular spiritual maintenance, cleansing rituals, prayer, meditation, whatever works for your belief system. These rules have kept me alive through more encounters than I care to count. They're not foolproof, nothing is, when dealing with forces we don't fully understand, but they significantly improve your odds. Think of them as seatbelts for the supernatural. They won't prevent every accident, but they make survival much more likely. Now the hour is getting late. The signal's been strong tonight, but I can feel it starting to waver. There is interference on the line, static that sounds almost like whispering. This is normal. At this time of night, the boundary between worlds is thin. Other things want to use this frequency. Other things want to speak to you. But before I sign off, I want to remind you of something important. These stories, these rules, this knowledge, it is not meant to make you paranoid. It is meant to make you prepared. There is a difference. Paranoia is fear without understanding. Preparedness is respect with knowledge. Be aware, be cautious, but don't let fear dominate your life. The vast majority of the time, nothing will happen. You'll go about your life normally, and the supernatural will stay where it belongs, in the shadows, in the margins, in the liminal spaces between what is and what might be. But when something does happen, you'll be ready. You'll recognize the signs. You'll know what to do. And that knowledge might save your life. Shusheng lives in Shanghai now, successful, married, 2 children. He still checks his flashlight batteries every week, still refuses to accept drinks from anyone during power outages. His wife thinks it is eccentric but harmless. She doesn't know the real reason. Maybe that is for the best. Some knowledge is a burden. Some memories are better left unshared. Song still visits his parents' grave every week. 75 years old now, still healthy, still maintaining that crucial boundary between honoring the dead and being consumed by them. He has become something of a village sage young. People come to him with questions about tradition, about the old ways. He teaches them what the village elder taught him: respect, but also boundaries. Love, but also self-preservation. And me, I continue these broadcasts, collecting stories, sharing knowledge, trying to preserve something valuable before it is lost entirely. Every generation forgets a little more. Every wave of modernization erases more of the old understanding. But as long as strange things keep happening, and they will, they always will, there is value in remembering how our ancestors survived them. The stories don't end here. They never end. They just pause, waiting for the next telling, the next listener who needs to hear them. And there will always be listeners, because the darkness never truly goes away. We just learn to live with it, to navigate it. to respect it without being destroyed by it. Tonight, you've heard about Shu Sheng and his too familiar grandmother, about Song and his hungry father, about me and the woman in white who waited in my apartment. These are just 3 stories among thousands, 3 warnings among countless others. But if they stick with you, if you remember them when you need them, then I've done my job. Check your locks before you sleep. Keep a light source within reach. And if something feels wrong, if someone shows up at the wrong time, if a familiar face looks slightly off, if you're offered something by someone you can't see clearly, remember these stories. Trust your instincts, maintain your boundaries, survive. This is Damien Tao, signing off from Netherwave Radio. The incense burns low, the protective circle is closing. It is time for you to go, and for me to seal this frequency until next time. Take what you've heard tonight into your life. Let it settle into your awareness. Let it become part of how you navigate the world. The shadows outside my window are moving, not threatening, just noticing, aware that I've been talking about them. The supernatural doesn't like being discussed too openly. It prefers to work in secrecy, in doubt, in the spaces where people convince themselves nothing is wrong. By naming it, we diminish its power. By sharing knowledge, we create protection. So spread these stories. Tell them to friends who need warning. Share them with family members who've forgotten the old ways. Post them online for strangers who might stumble across them at exactly the right moment. Every retelling is a casting of the protective circle, wider and wider, encompassing more people in its safety. And if you ever have a story of your own, if something happens to you that can't be explained, that needs to be shared, find me. I'm not hard to find for those who truly need to. The frequency is always here, waiting. Netherwave Radio doesn't really broadcast from anywhere physical. It broadcasts from the place between sleeping and waking, between knowing and doubting, between the living world and elsewhere. Until next time, children of the night, walk carefully, watch closely. And remember, the darkness is not your enemy, ignorance is. The darkness is simply where certain things live. Understanding this is the first step to surviving it. Good night. Sleep carefully. And if you hear knocking at your door after you've turned off the lights, check the eyes before you let them in. The red light on the equipment panel is fading. The broadcast ends. But remember, the stories never truly end. They're happening right now somewhere, to someone, maybe even to someone you know, maybe even closer than you think. This is Netherwave Radio. We'll see you in the darkness. Or perhaps the darkness will see you first. Be careful out there, listeners. And remember, knowledge is protection, but only if you use it. Before the signal dies completely, let me leave you with one final truth. These stories, Shu Sheng's terror in the darkness, Song's endless meals with the dead, my own encounter with the woman in white, they all teach the same lesson. The boundary between our world and the other is thinner than you think. And it is held in place not by physics or nature, but by our attention, our rituals, our respect. When we forget the old ways, when we dismiss superstition as primitive ignorance, when we turn on too many lights and convince ourselves there is nothing in the darkness, that is when the boundary weakens. That is when things slip through. Not because they've grown stronger, but because we've grown careless. So I ask you, when you turn off your lights tonight, what will you remember? Will you remember Shu Sheng's grandmother returning too quickly? Will you remember Song's father eating with endless hunger? Will you remember the woman in white standing in my apartment, waiting for permission? I hope so. I hope these images stay with you. Not to torment you, but to protect you. The signal is almost gone now. The static is rising. I can hear voices in it, voices that aren't mine, that don't belong to any living person. They're always there, waiting at the edges of transmission, trying to break through. But not tonight. Tonight, the frequency is sealed. A protection holds. This is Damien Tao, broadcasting from Netherwave Radio, reminding you respect the darkness, honor the dead, trust your instincts, and maintain your boundaries. These 4 principles have kept humanity safe for millennia. They'll keep you safe too. The incense burns low. The protective circle closes. Subscribe so you don't miss the warning when the spirits rise again. Sleep carefully, listeners. And may your dreams be free of visitors. The frequency fades. The night deepens, and somewhere in rural China, in a village you've never heard of, someone is hearing a knock at their door. Someone is seeing a familiar face that is slightly wrong. Someone is being offered something they shouldn't accept. Will they recognize the signs? Will they recognize the signs? We'll find out. We'll find out. We always find out. Because the stories always continue, and Netherwave Radio is always listening, always collecting, always waiting for the next tale from the darkness. Until then, good night.